welcome everyone, and I'm just going to give you my contact information. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can do that at president@nagc.com, or you can contact me at kstokes@ndes.ms.gov, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Mentoring up is one of those things that is, it came to me while I was in the private sector. We called it managing up, but mentoring is usually thought of as someone who guides or coaches a less seasoned or junior employee. However, in the government realm, agencies are often led by political appointees who may or may not know about your agency, its constituents, or its programs. So it's up to us as communicators to guide and coach them. And that's why I call this mentoring up. You're mentoring up the chain of command to the people that are leading the agency. Because let's face it, they're not usually chosen for their expertise in communications, but for their relationship to the person who appointed them. And the reality of today's world is that sometimes it falls to the communications professionals, that's you and I, to mentor up to the leaders to protect the agency's image and perhaps protect the boss's image as well. So that's why I call this mentoring up. And mentoring up to me is a two-way flow of sharing and learning about each other. You could call it mutual learning, or like I said, in the private sector, we called it managing up. But you're sharing your information, expertise, and skills. You need to understand and communicate the need for a dialogue. It's an opportunity for you to get to know your new leaders and for them to understand how you can help them. You can use the opportunity to get to know your mentee better, and you can let them know that you're the expert in communications, which your mentee probably isn't, but you probably don't want to point that out to them. I'll give you an example. When before the current executive director came on board, I was working for the previous executive director directly, and he had handpicked me for this job to handle a certain number of tasks that were very important to him. Well, we get a new governor, we get a new executive director, and I'm kind of not sure what I'm going to be doing. And so I had the opportunity to observe the new guy who came on board and thought, well, this is my opportunity to let him know who I am, what I did for the guy who sat in the office before him, and how I could help him in the future. And it was an interesting meeting. One of the things I shared with him was that we had recently begun a social media strategy, and that I was hoping to expand upon that over the next few years. And he looked at me and said, you know, if I never had to look at another computer again, I would be a happy camper. And I thought that didn't go well, but I didn't let it deter me. It just let me know what my boundaries were. So it was part of that two-way flow of communication, sharing and learning, and getting to know him and what his boundaries were and how far I could push it. I'll tell you what mentoring up is not, and it is not for the faint of heart. It can be tricky to mentor up to leaders, especially if they are new to an organization and neither of you is familiar with the other. That's why at the first opportunity that you can, it's very important to observe and learn about the new leaders. When I first put this mentoring up presentation together, I was delivering it at the 2015 Communications School in Memphis, Tennessee. And it never occurred to me that my boss would be in the room when I delivered this presentation. But she's a very supportive boss, and Memphis is just up the street from Jackson, Mississippi, where we all work. And she came to the NAGC school for the first time and was sitting in the room when I'm talking about how I sort of handle my communications with her. So when I say that mentoring up is not for the faint of heart, I mean that very sincerely. Some people will embrace you for mentoring up, My executive director is a prime example of that. When I sat down with him, he was very open to everything that I said to him. I told him what I had done for the previous guy who sat in his chair, and I told him about the performance numbers that I track, the policies both at the federal and the state level that I track. I told him about the speaking points that I would put together for the previous person, and he just sort of took that all in. He wasn't sure at that point what he was going to do with me, but he listened. And some people won't be that embracing, and you have to decide, are you really going to go through with this, the mentoring up piece, or not? And to me, it comes down to you have to decide if protecting your agency's message and brand are worth the risk of reaching up the ladder to mentor your leaders. So again, it is not for the faint of heart. Mentoring up is also not for your ego. It's all about your agency message. That's what's important. And telling that the leaders that you're the key to getting that message out is very important. You have to check your ego at the door. If you don't tell your leaders how wonderful you are at your job, you show them. The best storytellers will tell you that the best stories are those that show you the action and the detail, not the ones that just sort of dictate it to you. And at the end of the day, it's about getting the stories of your agency out, those things that you need to tell, and how you can help the leaders tell those stories. Here are some best tips that I've picked up along the way for mentoring up or managing up. Study your leaders. You've got to know your audience. What do they do well? Where can you help them do better? How well do they interact with staff? This can give you some insight on how to approach them. When I said that I talked with the new leader of our agency soon after he came on board, it wasn't the first day, trust me. I watched him how he interacted with staff. I listened to the words that he said, and one of the things that he said was that, I'll be honest with you, I'm a political hack. Those were his words, not mine. He said, I'm here because the governor asked me to be. He said, I don't know your organization. I'm depending on you to help me figure it out. And he was saying this to all of his senior staff. So I took a couple of weeks and watched him. And not only did I see that he was saying those things, I saw that he was doing those things. He was not one of those people that says one thing and does another. So I had the opportunity to get to know my audience a little bit. You need to know your own strengths and weaknesses. For example, if you tend to avoid conflict, mentoring up could be very difficult for you. So I would recommend that you practice your approach and anticipate pushback. It may seem overwhelming, but it is worth it. It may sound a little goofy, but it works. I would encourage you to sit down with someone that you trust to give you honest feedback and go through your presentation with him. And it needs to be someone who understands your agency and its needs, because between the two of you, you can figure out what the pushback will probably be, and you can rehearse how to overcome that pushback. You need to understand your motivation. At the end of the day, it's to make sure that your message is the key takeaway at every media event, every press event, every public meeting, everything that you send out about the organization. And here's one thing I can't stress too much is to stay on topic. Most leaders do not like rambling messages. You need to get in, strike, and get out. Again, check your ego at the door. You cannot approach this like you're doing the leaders a big favor. That may be exactly what you're doing, but no one likes to be handled. And if you give them that impression, you're likely done. One of the things that I can tell you about this is Knowing your audience, the things that work most for me are knowing my audience, knowing myself, and staying on topic. Because my leaders are very, they don't want people who ramble. That's all I can say about that. Why do you want to mentor up? And there are 4 reasons that, in my mind, are the best reasons for mentoring up. One is to educate your leaders. One is to mitigate potential problems that will help you understand those people who are going to need your help the most. Mentoring up is to help you communicate and to help them communicate. And at the end of the day, if you're very good at it, it's going to elevate the communications department within the organization, and it's going to elevate your message to the public. When I talk about educate, sorry guys if I had that in your way, does your boss know what you do? Does your boss know how you do what you do? Do they know your challenges? And does the boss know your worth? I go back to that first meeting that I had with our current executive director when I laid out the things that I did for the former guy and that I could do for him. And he remembered that, because a few days later, he came to me and he said, Kathryn, I've got to be on this radio show to talk about the agency and the things that it does, and I need some talking points. And he remembered that because I had sat down and talked with him just a few days before. At this point, he had been with the agency about 3 weeks. So I put together some talking points for him. He did this show on a Friday afternoon. Unfortunately, I couldn't hear it because we couldn't stream in the agency at the time. But on Monday morning, he came to me and he said, Kathryn, he said, I sat on that show and I used the talking points that you gave me. And my wife, who's my biggest fan and critic, listened to the show. And when I got home, she told me, you need to thank your staff because they made you sound just like you knew what you were talking about. He said, so here I am telling you what my wife said. Thank you for making me sound like I knew what I was talking about. Those are the best successes that you can have when mentoring up. But he probably wouldn't have known who to reach out to if I hadn't taken the initiative and sat down with him a few days earlier to kind of run through for him the things that communication can do for him. Mitigate. Having these mentoring up conversations can help you figure out if the boss has done something that could damage the agency's reputation, or have they done or said something that could bite them later on. Hopefully, you can utilize the mentoring up technique to prevent that from happening, because if they do it once, the odds are they may do it again. And this is a particularly tricky thing to do, but more often than not, the people least likely to reach out to you for help are the ones who are most likely to screw up. They may not always be open for assistance, so you need to tread carefully with these folks. It goes back to it's not for the faint of heart, but if at the end of the day you believe that protecting the agency's brand and its mission are more important than your boss's ego, then I think it's worth the mentoring up. It's an opportunity for you to communicate. It allows you to be a partner for communication effectiveness. Again, you need to show them how you can help. Help by crafting talking points or messages. And you can mentor up without being intrusive. For example, you could give them talking points without being asked. And you could say something like, hey, I know you have this upcoming engagement, and I know that you're really busy, so I prepared some information to help you ahead of the meeting. And just give it to them. They can use it or not. That's a very helpful technique and a really easy tool to do because it's something you do already. You need to know when to push people and know when to tell them to shut up. And sometimes that can be tricky. Communicating helps you be proactive instead of just reactive. I'll give you another example of sometimes you need to tell people when they shouldn't speak. We had a situation in our state a few years back where we were closing 3 of our centers and consolidating them into a newer, more modern facility that was closer to where the jobs were located in this region. And some people took it very personal. And there was one small town newspaper who took it upon themselves to be the voice of righteous indignation about the fact that their local job center was being closed and moved to another town. It doesn't matter that the facility was very old and it wasn't modern and there were no jobs in that town, and that the programs weren't changing, nothing was going away, it was just moving to a better, newer center where the jobs were located. And this particular person was a real big fish in a little pond and kind of irritating to the executives. And I had the dubious honor of hand-holding the editor of this newspaper. And we went out of our way to accommodate this person with information. We went so far as to invite her or her reporters to an opening, a pre-opening of the facility to show them what it would be like and how much more modern it would be and the great asset that it would be to the people in her community. The week that we were moving, we sent out our press release, which she got through our ordinarily channels. I also faxed a copy of the press release to her, and I emailed it to her and her news desk. We moved the facility. The next week, on the front page of this little small town newspaper, was a moving van in front of the old facility with a headline that said, "Center has moved, where have they gone?" And it made it sound like we were sneaking out in the middle of the night and not giving anybody any information about where they were going and where they could look for jobs and whatever. And I just thought that was ridiculous to the nth degree, and I mentioned it to the then executive director, thinking she thought it would be funny too, and she didn't. She thought she was very upset. And she looked at me and she said, "You need to call them, and you need to tell them they need to print a retraction, and you need to tell them that if they don't print a retraction, we're never giving them any more business, we're not sending them any press releases, we're not spending money on advertising." And I thought, oops, this is not a good thing to do. So I looked at her and I said, I don't think that we should handle it that way. And here's why. And I explained to her that I thought this person was a big fish in a little pond, and if we came off like that, it would be a little draconian, and that it would just keep the problem stirred up, that if we ignored it, I think it will go away. So this was my opportunity to say, you know, in this instance, silence is golden. She listened to me, and it did go away. So we were very fortunate in that instance. But you have to know when to say, okay, it's time to speak up, and it's time to be silent, because that portrays you as a true communications partner within the organization. Mentoring up is the opportunity for you to elevate the communications department. It stresses the importance of effective agency communications. It can elevate the status of the department, but most importantly, it elevates the agency's communication vision. Once you're seen as a partner and have the opportunity to get everything out in a timely and effective way, people understand your vision, and you've done exactly what your job says that you should do at the end of the day. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every time you try this, you're going to win, because you can't win over everyone. You know, you don't try to win over the haters. You're not the jackass whisperer. When you do that, you're just beating your head against the wall. Having said that, there are ways to work around the negatives. You can find an ally within the organization. You can get peers of the person that you're trying to reach to assist you. I'll give you an example of each of these. The strengths in numbers. One of the things that I've taken on recently in our agency is new manager training. And we've delivered this training a couple of different times. What makes it effective is the fact that agencies, directors, and department heads are delivering the training to these new managers. So new managers get the opportunity to put a name with a face and learn about each of the different departments of the agency. What we have noticed, though, is that there is a disparity in the ability of the managers and the directors who are delivering the training to be really effective communicators. And now we could handle this one of two ways. We could reach out to them each individually, which could create hard feelings, or we could put together presentation skills for the masses. And that's what we've tried to do. I've gotten my boss on board, actually I think it might have been her idea, that we put together a training for the people who are going to be presenting. That way we have strength in numbers, no one is singled out, and hopefully the people who need the training to present can get better at it. They know their stuff really well, but they just may not be the best presenters. The find an ally. Again, in our organization, and geez, I really hope that nobody from my organization is on right now, but we do have one particular leader who is very aggressive in his beliefs, and if he has the idea or his right-hand man has an idea, it's the best thing since sliced bread. But if someone else has an idea, it may be met with pushback. And sometimes that's a really frustrating thing to deal with because he doesn't always see the big picture and what it does for the agency as a whole, as opposed to just his portion of the organization. But if you can find an ally, I have found that his right-hand guy is very open and very accommodating to listen to ideas. And so if I can get this person on board, he can present the idea, and I get to turn around the negative and make it a positive and get the idea to go forward. And it's still mentoring up. It's just mentoring up around the world, but it works. Finding an ally, it could be the person's admin. This may be a leader who has a particularly trustworthy relationship with their admin. It could be a peer. Sometimes I will go to my boss, who is a peer to this person, and she will fight that battle for me because I can convince her that it's important. So even though there are negatives and you can't win over everyone, sometimes there are ways around the wall. One thing you've got to know about mentoring up, though, is you've got to know when to quit. There just comes a point that you may be banging your head against the wall, or worse, you may be making an enemy. And the last thing you want to do is to make an enemy. But the benefits of mentoring up for me, and I hope for those of you who employ some of these techniques, is that you really are viewed as a partner with decision makers. Once you have gained their trust and help them understand that at the end of the day, you're here to make them look good, and that's all that you're here to do, they really do view you as a partner and will seek you out to help them get their messages across. Because making them look good makes you look good. Mentoring up also expands the visibility and value of communications departments. It goes back to not just making them look good, but getting the message out. If you have an agency that's doing really great things, and I am very fortunate to have an agency that's cutting edge in a lot of ways for what we do, getting that message out is kind of a high for the guys who are making it happen. And so they have begun to reach out to our communications department to get those messages out. And it's all about building those relationships. And obviously, at the end of the day, when you're mentoring up and you are seen as a partner and you have expanded the visibility and the value of communication, it can only have a positive impact on your agency and its mission. So to review, mentoring up is your opportunity to educate your internal audience. Mentoring up can prevent issues for the future. And mentoring up strengthens the need for and the understanding of communication within your department, within your agency. This is, again, my contact information, and if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Kathryn. Yeah, if you have questions, please go ahead and type those into your questions box and send them along, and we will address those as we go. I've got just a couple of here. So in terms of the ripple effect you kind of alluded to, can you talk about an experience where you've seen that ripple effect, not just with the current person you were mentoring, but a long-term effect of your mentoring on yourself and or the communications department in general in terms of raising the profile of importance or advocating for the communications department for funding, that kind of thing?
Well, I need to explain that our agency is a state agency, but we are federally funded. So the funding is pretty flat. We're not going to get more funding no matter what we do. And if I understand what you mean by ripple effect, I'll go back to the social media thing, if I can. You know, at the very beginning, my executive director let me know that he was not a computer person. He does not do social media, and he was not really interested in social media. But I never dropped the idea, and I continued to expand it. And recently he came to me and he had asked if I would be willing to put together a social media strategy for the agency. Because of some of the work that I have done with him and with other people in the agency, our State Workforce Investment Board also reached out to me and asked me if I would do the same thing for them, if I would put together a communications plan for the SWIP. If that's that kind of thing that you're talking about, because it did increase the visibility of the communications role, and so people started reaching out to us to ask us to help them get their message out. Did that answer the question, hopefully?
It sounded like it answered it to me. Yes, I think that was good. The other one is when you're talking about dealing with folks who are non-receptive, and you gave some good tips. Could you talk a little bit, could you give another example of how that worked, and maybe in the private sector as well as the public sector?
Private sector was so long ago, I'm not even sure I remember. Oh, yes, I do have one from the private sector. And this wasn't necessarily a communications idea, but it was making sure that I could get the information I needed to get to the person who needed to have it. And this was in the private sector. We had a situation that was an internal one. It was not going to expose our organization to any external criticism, but there was a very serious problem internally that was created by one of our directors. And it was causing a huge morale issue within the organization. At the time, I was a supervisor. I wasn't even a manager. And I needed to make sure that someone who could impact the situation was notified of the problem. And it comes to the enlisting an ally. I knew the executive assistant to the president of the company. And I didn't know her real well, but she knew me well enough to know that I was not an alarmist, and that if I needed to reach out to the CEO and the president, that there must be an issue. And so I wrote a letter to the CEO and to the president, who had just come on board like a month earlier, alerting them of the situation that was causing some real tension and derision and morale issues in my part of the organization, which was not a small part of the company. It included the customer service, the billing, and the fulfillment arena of our organization, so it was a pretty important area. And I just outlined the issues and what they were and what I saw as a real problem that needed to be addressed at a much higher level than I could do so. And she hand-delivered that letter to the CEO and the president, and I actually got a response back from the new guy who said he was new, and he appreciated my concern, and he didn't know anything about it, but he would look into it. And I thought that was just kind of blowing me off at the time. But within a few months, the person who was causing the problem was demoted, and a new person was brought in. So that wasn't necessarily maybe that wasn't a good example, but it's how, if you have an ally in an organization, and like I said, she wasn't a real good friend of mine. She just knew me. She knew who I was, and she knew that I wasn't, like I said, an alarmist with an axe to grind or anything. I would never have reached out to that level if it hadn't been important to me. So that's one example. Another example within this organization was several years ago. One of the ideas that a group of us had was to advance some technology in the company, and the IT person that I was talking to said, "Oh, we could never do that. We could never afford to do that." And so I just asked if one of the other IT people could come in the room, and I asked him. He was a little higher on the org chart. Not necessarily a friend of mine, but an ally in this sense. And I proposed to him, and he said, "I don't see why we couldn't if we could get, the right money and the right people." Fast forward, now I'm not saying that one of these has to do with the other, but it put the bug in his ear, and he has been responsible for launching 2 mobile apps for our agency to help our customers when no one else had. Now, I'm not sure that conversation that I had with him and said, "Hey, could we do a mobile app?" had anything to do with it, but it certainly put a bug in his ear. And we want to work now. So you never can tell when an idea may come to fruition. And he's one of those people that I will reach out to now for something that's very important that I need to have some sort of elevated conversation with that needs to reach his boss. It never hurts.
Great. So you established a relationship as well.
Exactly.
That's great. So Sarah has a quick question. She asks if you have advice for when another department within your agency, the same agency you work for, does not seem to find value in communicating with customers. Is there something you could use mentoring up for, or any other techniques you know to bridge that gap?
Well, I can say that mentoring up does help, and the techniques that I've told you about are very successful, have been successful for us. If Sarah would like to give me her number, I would be happy to call her and talk this through with her, because what I want to say is it may not happen overnight. Our IT organization, I'll give you an example. IT in our organization we are one of the most technology advanced company agencies that do what we do in the nation. other states are reaching out to try to get our technology. But they're not always good about letting us know what that is. They forget that our own people are their customers, and that we need to know what's going on so we can tell people. It's part of customer service. And that's been very frustrating for us. But by building those partnerships, they are now starting to reach out to our communications department and say, hey, we've got this coming on down the line. What can you do to help us get the word out? Now, that has not happened overnight. It has literally taken a couple of years to make that happen, but our frontline director of communication has never given up on that. I think if it's another department within your own agency and they're really not good about reaching out to customers or customer service, if you can find a peer within your organization to the person who leads that group, that may be the best in for your mentoring up.
Right, gotcha. Great, thanks so much. That's all I have for questions for right now. Go ahead.
But again, if Sarah would like to reach out to me to talk it through specifically, I'll be happy to do that if she wants to leave her information.
Great. Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll pass yours on to her. So I have another question here from Stephanie who says, so your new boss thinks he's the best communicator, however, he's not. For example, she had one who said he was great at TV interviews, so they scheduled one, and although they prepped him, he wasn't, and the interview wasn't used. Any thoughts about seizing that teachable moment?
Oh, yeah, I have a few thoughts. Some are successful and some aren't. We actually have someone here who, he doesn't necessarily think he's the best communicator, but he has a lot of opportunities to communicate. And one of the things that we did is we brought in someone from outside to coach all of our senior staff on media training. Unfortunately, he wasn't here that day.
Oh, no.
Everybody else got great training, but he missed it. But, you know, that is a good way of tackling the problem. Bringing someone from outside, sometimes if you can do so, is a very good way of handling it. You could also use those techniques internally. And you might pose the idea of recording them in a fake setting. When we actually brought in our outside person, one of the people who sat through the training was our executive director, who does have a lot of media experience. And one of the pieces of this training was that after the initial training period, the presenter would record us, each of us, in a mock interview, and then give us feedback. And when it came our executive director's turn, at the end of it, he said, you know, I sat through this whole thing, and if everybody got up and said, this is so intimidating, he thought, how can that possibly be? You do this all the time. You talk in front of people. He said, when I got up here and I'm sitting in front of all the people who report to me and was asked those questions that I was quite frankly prepared for, I was very nervous. So it gave him a whole new perspective and appreciation for that kind of training. So perhaps you could approach it as, we would like to do a few mock interviews so you can see how you do, and this will be an opportunity for you to improve on your already exceptional skills. If you can get them with other leaders in there at the same time so that they can see each other, it's even a better outcome. Our executive director was really very impressed with the whole training, and he was really surprised at how nervous he felt when he got up there for his mock interview.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach, and that, like you said, you can even out the playing field for everybody.
Yeah, it goes back to that strengths and numbers, and sometimes standing up in front of their peers is a much more, even though everybody in the room reported to this guy, because they are at a point his peers, it gave him a whole new approach, or a whole new appreciation for how intimidating it can be. Because quite frankly, he was much more comfortable when he was being recorded for the evening news, because there weren't people who knew him standing around watching him.
That's how it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. Great, thanks. Great group, guys. We had a really nice attendance today. I'm just thrilled everybody was able to join us, and I hope that we'll talk to you and see you again here for the next encore presentation, and of course to hear Chris Pointer talk in later in December. That registration, if I wanted to mention, is not up yet. However, it'll be up in the next couple or 3 days. We've got staff who are all supporting a conference this week, so we'll get that registration up early next week. So keep an eye out for that on the website and also on your email. That is going to be a terrific story. It was really it's such a cool process and such a cool set of products they put together. So it's going to be interesting, and I'll send the link also to the case study they put together so you can look at it ahead of time. Otherwise, I think we're good, Kathryn. Anything else you need to cover before we sign off today?
I can't think of anything unless anybody wants to get in their Blue Pencil Gold Screen Award entries before the early bird deadline, because it's cheaper.
Yep, that's right, December 8th. And yeah, I think that's all I have as well. So hey, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Enjoy your break. We'll talk to you afterward on December 1st, I think it is. And of course, always call and email us if you need anything. And if you're interested in that Communication School Program Committee, let us know at info@negc.com. We would really like to have you in the mix and helping shape the next communication school, which will be in Florida, by the way. So it's a perfect time to jump on board so we can get to the warm climes. Thanks again, Kathryn. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We'll talk to you soon, and happy holidays. Bye-bye now, everybody.
Bye-bye.